All right. Thank you for your patience, first of all. And thanks so much for joining us today for this event, A Call to Eroticism. And I think we can all agree that we need some of that right now, right? Before we get started, I just want to say a little bit about this space that we're in today, the Center for Sex and Culture. A place where I think that Anais Nin will feel very much at home. CSC is a non-profit organization and community space that hosts sex-positive cultural events like this one, and provides education and resources for audiences across the sexual and gender spectrum. And if you take a look at the calendar, the CSC calendar, which is online, you'll notice how broad that spectrum is. And now it's off, okay. There are art events like this one, writing workshops, sexual technique workshops, book signings, discussion groups for LGBTQ audiences and beyond. The CSC has been hosting long-running programs like TMI, Sex Workers Confidential, and the Erotic Reading Circle, which is hosted by our own Carol Queen, who is also the co-founder of the center. Yes. You can take classes here in pole dancing, erotic hypnosis, rope bondage, how to eat pussy like a champ, and the etiquette of polyamory, and much, much more. When figures associated with sexual communities come through town, they often give talks here. Betty Dodson, the mother of masturbation, recently gave a presentation. A couple of years ago, when California was voting on Prop 60, the condom bill, right? The CSC hosted an event for sex workers and lawyers who specialize in that field to actually talk about what that public policy would mean for those people. Hello. So CSC offers space for groups that make San Francisco what it is. And it's a hub of education, activism, and pleasure, with truly something for everyone. And notably, it does it at a time that it's increasingly difficult to afford space in San Francisco. I'm sure I don't need to tell anyone in this room how the tech boom has changed the Bay Area. Twitter, the Twitter headquarters is just around the corner. And yes, you can go throw tomatoes at them later. No. But the rent has tripled here. And unlike other nonprofits that stay afloat because of grants, the CSC is mainly supported by the community. So as they say on PBS, people like you. And so to that end, there's a new CSC Patreon account with all sorts of goodies if you donate. There's also an Amazon Smile account associated with the center, and today is the last day where they are doing a triple matching program. Also, April 19th is Give Out Day, which is a national day in which donors and nonprofits get matched together for mainly LGBTQ organizations. And so the Center for Sex and Culture is part of that as well. So if you'd like today's panel, or if you just like the idea of trying to do San Francisco the way it is a little bit, Sex Positive San Francisco, it'd be wonderful if you could contribute in some way. We have a mailing list at the back there as you go out, and it would be great if you could add your name to our list. Okay, so today, yes, event? Oh. Yeah. Oh.
We don't want you to laugh and then
Oh.
saved her life.
Wow. That would be exciting, though. Okay. All right.
Okay, sorry.
Whew. No, I appreciate that. My minder. Okay, so a call to eroticism. This panel was inspired by and coincides with Colette Standish's lovely and sumptuous exhibition, Anais Through the Looking Glass and Other Stories, which will be up until the 7th of May. TBA, and there might even be a snazzy party at the end. We'll see, we'll see. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. So Nin, smiling up there on the wall, is our muse. Although she was always urging women not to play that traditional role of muse and to just invent for themselves, which all of our panelists here have done. Nin's two most famous volumes of erotica, Delta of Venus and Three Little Birds, were written during the 1940s and published posthumously in 77 and 79. And I'm always puzzled that her erotica has earned this reputation with people who haven't read it as being sort of flowery or soft-focused or something. And all you have to do is read a couple of pages to know, au contraire, that it is a cornucopia of polymorphous perversity. Truly, there's something for everyone in there. At the same time, Nin's erotica has a highly distinctive voice. It's lyrical, very intensely atmospheric, and much more psychological than most of that work at the time was. She once remarked that eroticism is one of the basic means of self-knowledge, as basic as poetry. So she was a pioneer of sex writing, and all contemporary erotica authors really are indebted to her, whether they know it or not. So that brings us to our panelists today. Dr. Carol Queen, as I said, co-founded the Center for Sex and Culture, and she's the staff sexologist and company historian at Good Vibrations. The woman founded Sex Shop, I'm sure all of you know, where she's worked since 1990. She's a noted cultural sexologist whose work has been widely published, and she's written, co-authored, and edited several books, most recently the Sex and Pleasure book, Good Vibrations Guide to Great Sex for Everyone. Stephen Rains is a Los Angeles-based poet, educator, and was appointed, what I think must surely be the best job title ever, the first city poet of West Hollywood. Yay! Rains has organized many Nin-related events, including Anais Nin at 105 at the Hammer Museum in 2008, and most recently he co-produced The Allure of Anais Nin at Antioch University, Santa Barbara. He's published chapbooks, poetry collections, and edited 4 anthologies. He edited My Life is Poetry, featuring his students in the first ever autobiographical poetry workshop for LGBT seniors. Cool. Dorian Katz is a visual artist, curator, and community arts organizer based in Oakland. As an artist, she works primarily in ink drawings, artist multiples, and installations. She's the gallery director here at the Center for Sex and Culture, and she exhibits contemporary art and archival materials. I have to say, I was privileged to witness her install this show, and you do not want to mess with her when she has a level and a measuring tape in her hand. She's good. Dorian's organized queer arts events locally since 2000. Visually, her aesthetics has a lot in common with cartoonists and outsider artists. She earned an MFA at Stanford University, and her alter ego is Poppers the Pony. And she has an upcoming event at Berkeley, Talk at Berkeley, where she will be appearing as Poppers. Do you know the date of that yet? Or should everyone just watch it?
Yeah, it's on Saturday, April 14th at 10:45. It's through, if you look at their website, I can't tell if it's Mike is hearing. Okay. If you look at their website, they're at UC Berkeley, they have a center for the study of sexual culture, and they're putting on a conference. If you find out and want to see that.
Is that trademark infringement?
No, you're good.
That's good. And finally, Colette Standish, the woman of the moment. She is an English painter and photographer. She graduated from St. Martin's College in London in 1991 as part of the wave of YBA, young British artists, Damien Hirst, Tracy Emin, and the like. I'm sure you've heard of them. Her achievements include Jessup's Photography Prize in London in 2000 and fellowship awards in New Mexico, Italy, and Spain. Her works in many public and private collections, including the Museum of Fine Arts in Santa Fe and the Anais Nin Foundation Art Collection. Her body of work has included many edgy and erotic subjects over the years. She's a frequent contributor to A Cafe in Space, the Anais Nin Literary Journal, and she can be seen in volume 8, 9, 13, 14, and 15. Her poem, A Letter, published in volume 8, has recently been made into a music video entitled I Was in Love, Still Am. Is that what we were looking at? Okay. By an avant-garde collective of artists based in Manchester, UK, and Florence, Italy. So, let's begin with the lady smiling down at us. I'd like to ask each one of you how you first encountered Nin, and in particular, and what, if any, influence it's had on your life and work. Good.
Well, as the story goes, I was 17, I was 17. I had a romantic boyfriend who actually gave me a copy of Delta and Venus, just to get things kind of in the mood and everything, and that was it. Needless to say, him and I did not kind of we sort of split up a few months later, but Anais has kind of been my lover, muse or whatever ever since. So yeah, that's my yeah.
So I was 15 years old, and one of my best friends gave me a copy of Delta Venus and said, "Put this in your bag. It's the best smut you'll ever read." And it was. The previous book she had loaned me was Machiavelli's The Prince, so this was a very, very different kind of book. And I was 15, I was young and full of hormones, and I think I jacked off 8 times by page 12 to the book. And then when I kind of exhausted the collection and exhausted physically, I started paying attention to the preface. And it was a preface that was an excerpt from her diary. And I took note of that. I probably wasn't so bookish at the time, but I took note, and I thought, wow, people write this way in their diary. And so to me that was fascinating. And I wanted to know more about this woman who had a completely unpronounceable name to me. No one I knew was, of course, talking about her. And so then I went to my high school library and looked to see if they had books by Anais Nin, which is like so comical that I thought they would. But I did know about interlibrary loans. So the only Anais Nin book in the collection, in the whole library system, was volume 5 of the diary. And so I kind of jumped in halfway into that story. And that was the first book I ever read, and the images of, there's a well-known party, the Come As Your Madness party, that there are photographs of in that book, and people know the image of Anais with a birdcage on her head and eyeballs and pasties. And but that photo reminded me of my friends and I who were going to clubs and raves at the time too. So it was just, I just felt this like deep connection, and though the stories in Delta Venus were super exciting, it was that voice of hers in the diary that really haunted me, and I wanted to know more. So that's my introduction.
I first encountered her journals. I stumbled on them at a used bookstore when I was an undergraduate, and I was really taken with her descriptions of her friends and relationships, and that really drew me in.
I think I saw the cover of the diaries before I got involved with her erotica, although I'm sure I didn't read the diary first. I'm sure I read the erotica first. And the diary, the image on the diaries in that era, anyway, in the 70s, was one of her photos, and it was just I was like, what a stunning and interesting looking human that is. I'll keep an eye out. I'll read those diaries later, and I did in the 80s, but in the 70s, I was busy trying to come out, and my girlfriend and I were, once I found one, were heavily involved in trying to find erotic material that spoke to us. There was not a whole lot that was made for lesbians at that point. And Nin was in some ways the highest profile erotic female writer that included some woman-on-woman energy and everything else too. Since dropping into her world then and becoming a writer later, I'm especially interested that she was writing for pay and writing for a patron. Something I think I didn't know right away when I started to read the books with my girlfriend. But I also was really happy that she was a bisexual role model. Whether she was out as bi or whether she identified as bi, I'm not even sure. But that she was able to get in touch with that range of eroticism was really meaningful to me. I was having a really hard time stuffing myself into one box. And in fact, when I finally managed to do it, I popped right out again like a jack-in-the-box a few years later. It just didn't work out. And something about her ranging, curious mind that was willing, regardless of what she herself did sexually, to try to inhabit as fully and psychologically and erotically as she could these various kinds of characters and scenarios was really meaningful to me at an impressionable young age.
And I remember, Carol, you told me actually recently that when Good Vibrations first started stocking books, it only had a very, very small number, but one of them was Delta Venus.
Yeah, that's right. I think we must have had a half dozen books at the very beginning in the year in the 70s, but Nin was on the shelves along with a couple of feminist sex therapists.
Right, and then there was this explosion of erotica for women, for other audiences as well, but so many of them harkened back to her. So let's get to this entity that you want to make a call to, eroticism. I mean, the description, a call to eroticism, suggests that there's something about eroticism that has faded or that needs a vanguard, that somehow we aren't in touch with eroticism. So I'd like to hear what you think, if it's a data term, if it's, what does it mean, both as a genre, erotica, and also as a mode, eroticism. Carol's hand shut up really fast.
Well, I really do want to know what Colette wants us to evoke today, because she's sort of our priestess in this context where we have these iconic objects that evoke Anais, but then also we're trying to bring something forth in her spirit, but that is more contemporary too. That's my read anyway. I really think that, first I want to say that the term erotica has I think really been batted around in a way that's problematic. It gets set opposite porn all the time. Some people don't think they like erotica because they want something raunchier. It has this feeling and it's kind of maybe more feminine, maybe more romantic, maybe more soft or flowery or whatever. And really erotica is at sexology school they call it erotology, which sounds a little more serious, I think, in some ways, which is basically a culture's written reckoning with sexuality and the erotic. And I think humans in Western culture in the 20th, 21st century tend to think of sex as being this physical set of actions maybe, but eroticism to me goes into the question of whether we have more sex in our brain than in our body. And I think that we do.
Yeah, I mean,
That's what it means to me.
Yeah, I mean,
Brain sex.
yeah, the whole thing about eroticism, right, for me as an artist and as a woman, it is very complex. Sex is the start, sex is the basis, but eroticism is a journey that goes all around the body. It's intellectual, it's physical, it's spiritual, it's a holistic approach. And I think my point in this day and age where it's, you know, very sort of, like you mentioned about pornography, it's very quick, a quick fix, a fast food, eat quick, you know. Whereas eroticism is more like a slow cooked meal with selected ingredients added in to flood the senses. And it's about that magic, it's about poetry, it's about actually stopping back and thinking more. It's a philosophy. That's what I think. And it's more than just quick fuck or quick shag or whatever shag you say in England, a quick shag. It's more, it's a lot more. And my thing is I want to bring that poetry and magic back.
So in the preface of Delta Venus, the excerpt from the diary that I referenced earlier, Anais talks about it was an anonymous collector, and the feedback that he continually gave her work is that he wanted her to leave out the poetry, less poetry, and it was something that really bothered her. And so she wrote a letter, maybe with the help of her friends, where they wrote a letter kind of addressing his complaint. And in it, she talks about how they felt sorry for him, that he deprived his senses of aromas and lighting and touch. And so I think that there's kind of an answer there in that response in terms of how Nin saw erotica, but it also helps us come up with a definition for ourselves too, that it's just not just the penetrative act. And I think she even said something to the effect of like how clinical, like he just wanted clinical descriptions, and she wasn't willing to do that, and she found it offensive that he wanted to be so myopic.
It occurred to me when Carol was speaking, what if we thought of eroticism as like another kind of ism, like a religion or a way of life, or a philosophy.
Yeah, so I mean the thing is, no, that which brings us on to, I mean for me, eroticism right from the start was a philosophy. That is exactly what I saw it as. You know, okay, it might have got rough on the edges a little bit and push it in different areas, but to me, it was a philosophy that goes way, for me, connected with it was the surrealists and the art thing. But I went further, and that whole discusses about George Bataille and Sartre, and it was a philosophy. It was, and you know what? You can go back even to like the ancient times, like Greek mythology, Roman, and even like the whole tantric. It all starts. They're all philosophies, and it all starts with the body and the pleasure, and it all starts from there. So that's a good, good point that you said.
Yeah, of course, the names that come up are Bataille, who had his own theory of erotism, right? He took himself extremely seriously, right? The sense of life up until the point of death. Like, really? That's eroticism? Okay. For some people, maybe. And then Sod and so on. So she had a lot of male models, and also when she was trying to respond to the poetry, she was going through Psychopathia Sexualis, right, Krop Debian and the other sexologists, and trying to find the most way out things she could throw in there. So she was drawing, in some ways, from these philosophies, but they were, even surrealism was André Breton, and who is a total misogynist. So what's interesting is she drew from all of those very heterosexual male philosophers and did something different with it. Did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I wanted to say, I think in the present moment, if we think about something that's a philosophy, that's an ism-ish, that we could call out as being about sexuality and sexual diversity, it would be sex positive philosophy, right? Because I really think of that as a philosophy, although some people think of it as just basically a way of pressuring their girlfriend to have a threesome, but which is not what it's supposed to do. It's not how it's supposed to be deployed. But when I think about that, I also think that what Colette was saying about eroticism doesn't necessarily infuse sex positivity. It does for some people, for sure. But for others, their sexuality may be just as utilitarian and focused on the descriptors as her anonymous patron, and it doesn't mean that if we step into sex positive space that we automatically have access or prioritize or valorize that sort of poetry, that depth, that sensuality, that whatever you want to call it. I mean, and again, I don't want us to think that eroticism is just a soft, nice version of wham bam. Thank you, ma'am. That's not at all what eroticism can be.
Yeah, and that's where I think where art comes in, art and literature. You know, I mean, I kind of like, I know you guys, I know all your work, and there is that eroticism, that magic that is missing. I mean, you know, it doesn't matter whether it sounds like it's coming across like really hardcore. When you go beyond that, because eroticism is genderless anyway. Once you're getting down and dirty, it doesn't matter who you like, who's next to you, what you're doing. If they're giving you good head or something like that, easy. But when that's happening, it's kind of irrelevant, like the gender. But I think that is where art and literature is important, and that's where the pushes, like that call to eroticism, is not just in life, but also in art as well. And I think that would help it.
Well, you know, I think I want to end the. Laura mentioned that I was saying that there were the tiny handful of books at Good Vibrations initially, and then the end of that sentence is 15 years later, less than 15 years later, when I started, there were dozens and dozens and dozens of books, many of them erotic anthologies in particular, some erotic novels and other things. Nin had obviously been joined by lots of people, and it had only been about a decade, little more than a decade in the US, that women other than Nin were being identified and known as erotic writers, pretty much. I mean, we're in a relatively new era as far as that is concerned, and I would venture to say that for many of those writers, if not for all of us, she was really a beacon in that way. But the other thing is that the vast majority of those were women writers, and it wasn't only because Good Vibrations was a woman-founded store and wanted to be appealing to women. It was also because many more women were writing and exploring into this eroticism, sexuality, sexual diversity. Many gay men had already been those kind of writers, but in that particular historical moment, gay men had some other shit they had to take care of, if you know what I mean. Well, if you don't, HIV/AIDS, that's what I'm talking about. And so women kind of popped up and began to do this bookish conversation that had a lot to do with bringing out erotic possibility and what it was like to write as a woman and what it was like to not matter if you were a woman, and all the different things that, like answering Freud back when he wanted to know what women wanted. It's like, well, if he just paid attention in the first place, he'd probably have run into her, and she probably would have told him. But there was so much of that work by women, and it felt really fresh and really important at that moment. Not that it doesn't now, but I just want to remind everybody that this era of women erotic writers, with the exception of Nin as our sort of foremother, is practically only 30 years old.
And you know, it's the same with actual visual art. There's not a lot. You know, there was a couple like in the 60s. I know Tanya in the front row kind of reminded the names. Yeah. But you know, again, it's kind of like relatively like new. I mean, there's like Tracy Emin. We mentioned Tracy Emin, who did the whole bed thing, and she's a bit like my nemesis, but that's another story. But I have to give her credit because she actually pushed open the doors for me and other like people. So and you know, as visual artists, it's difficult. It's really difficult because people just automatically think, oh, it's just about sex, it's just about shame, it's just about this. And I think it's wrong, and I think it's important that as visual artists we carry on. And I'd like to hear Dorian's point on it.
Well, sorry. There's some things like, there's so much anonymous art about sex in the past that we don't know who made it, and it's quite possible, like internationally, and it is quite possible that a lot of it was made by women. We don't know what other aliases people chose. We certainly have examples of other non-erotic writers who chose to write under aliases to get published as a man. So that's entirely possible. Getting back to one thing Carol said about there's always been like, well, that work's erotic, that work has gone too far, and now it's pornographic. In addition to that, I also really like art about sex or addressing sex that maybe is erotic to some people, but certainly not to others, and contains humor. There's a lot of that as well that I really enjoy.
Can I just jump in for a second? Just to sort of add some historical questions to it. I mean, it seems to me that the erotic is a very, very old kind of art. I mean, yeah, Western tradition, and the Kama Sutra, the Japanese pillow books, it goes way, way back. I mean, even look at the most well-known classical works of art, you know, some of them are extremely erotic. So there's something that happened when erotica became our moment, our 20s, publishing practices, capitalism, commercialism of this stuff, where it was not just seen in a museum or in a holy context of a temple or something, but you could actually buy it, and you could have it in your own home, and so you know, it would be cheap in some cases, but it has a lot to do with the context, and it seems like it's a very 20th century, starting in the Victorian period, into the 20th century, that erotica became this kind of category. People would collect it, sort of obsessively and so on. But it's not that it just suddenly appeared, you know, in the 20th century. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to speak to Anais's history with erotica is that the collection of erotica came out posthumously. It actually was work that she went back and forth with during her lifetime of being proud of and actually kind of embarrassed of. And unfortunately, it was the only book of hers to reach the New York Times bestseller list. And this is also a writer who, when publishers were not publishing her, that she bought her own printing press. And she would sit for hours a day at a foot pedal press, printing up her own work and, you know, setting it line by line. She actually said that was the best editor she ever had, was, you know, because then she would question each word because it took so much time. So here you have someone who was creating a space, you know, that these were not being offered to her, you know, and so she was creating it herself and doing these things on her own. But her relationship with the erotic, which she wrote about, she also lived this very varied life sexually, but it was something that she was conflicted about at times too.
You know, that really makes me think of something I want to say, that there isn't just one definition of eroticism, of course, or the erotic. It's like sexuality, it's diverse. And the diversity means that any of us who are adventurers or writing for $1 a page and needing to make the rent or whatever we're doing have a lot of options that we can touch and utilize, explore, riff on, try to write our way into. I think some people write what they know, and I think some people write what they really have never experienced before. And it seems to me that sometimes you can tell the difference. Maybe in some cases you can't. But the way that Anais had to make the space to do that kind of exploration, not only from her own perspectives, in her diaries as well as in her fiction and other writing, but also just to be the kind of writer she needed to be in the first place, with these constraints weighed against her, is also the way that we have to try to figure out how to express and pull out our own erotic truth, because this is a much more sexualized time in some respects than she lived in. We would be really incorrect if we thought of the 20s and 30s, especially in Europe, as an unsexy time. I think it was really fucking sexy in many places, but I mean, you know, we all invent sex in our generation and then carry it on. But I think that it's really common today for people to skim the surface of the erotic when they write or when they make art, because there's a kind of art and writing that is acknowledged, and everybody who really wants to dig into it still has to take that journey. It's an inner journey. It's a, how do I really, you know, what kind of language am I going to use? Am I going to come up against a wall of shame? Is there anything that I can add to this experience for other people? I mean, you have to have a certain amount of, I must say this for my own use, if not for somebody else's. And then if you're fortunate, and I think we almost always are, and you know, in the internet age, it really proves it. You can throw up a blog post about how you're into something or other, and then the next thing you know, you've got a club and like a sex party set up for pretty soon, because if there's one person who's thought of it, chances are fair that somebody else has too. And even if not, if you really do that genuine work, I think you open the door for other people to think that what you've expressed is worth thinking about, worth doing. I mean, that I don't have a dog in that race. I don't care if somebody has sex a particular way, but I hope when I write that I can evoke the kind of sexuality I'm trying to work with in such a way that somebody, regardless of whether they're familiar with that mode, goes, oh, huh. I mean, sometimes that's the best you could ask for, to open a mind a little bit, and whatever her reason for writing the erotica, she did that for so many of us.
Yeah, and that's exactly, you just nailed it there, because that's exactly what I intend to show. And I don't know if it's documented a little bit, but I want to get this show around. I've got an opportunity to take it to Europe, and I'm going to do it. And I want to get it around because I want to create these kind of conversations that we're having, and because it is important. It's like you know, if you can just get one person to think outside of the box, then you've done your job, and you just nailed it. Well done. Well done. There is one kind of, I wanted to say this quote that when I was doing all this research about art and eroticism, and I came up with this one thing, and I just, given the way it's going, and I think it's going really well, but I just wanted to say that art is the most feared and valued weapon society has, because it's created by outsiders. And if you put eroticism into that mix, which is a very human experience, it becomes more powerful than God. So I just thought I'd say that because I think that's pretty cool. That's my Manchester women up. I think that's pretty cool. So anyway, I just wanted to say that before we.
Well, just picking up on that idea of the outsider, and thinking about Nin, how when we're discussing why eroticism is powerful, how important is transgression as an element? I mean, you talked about shame or maybe making what's private public, or it crossing boundaries. In what way do you think transgression might be closely connected to this entity that we're calling eroticism here today?
Oh, totally.
Dorian.
I don't even know where to begin. I only learned the word transgression at age 40 because it was the title of a class at college, Salome and the Aesthetics of Transgression, with Petra.
Was it useful once you learned it?
Yeah, it is. I think of my art as transgressive. I have to say that without knowing that word, getting back to Carol was talking about the huge crop of erotic work by dykes and other queers that came out of the 90s really helped me figure out a few things about what I wanted to try. And also I saw that if it was hot, to me, it didn't matter if I was reading something, it didn't matter if it was gay or straight or whatever. I guess also thinking about so this class was looking at, we looked at Oscar Wilde, Salome, and then we read other things afterwards that was very transgressive and queer. And I think through transgressing in your art, you kind of, you're setting your foot down and saying you won't, you're going to do what you want, and society can suck it. And
All right.
I would say that transgression for the sake of transgression is, I find boring. Actually, I find that if someone, especially in writing, if they're writing because it's coming from a place of excitement or exploration, that I'm going to find interesting. But for someone who is like purposely trying to push a boundary, I sense it, or I think I'm sensing it. And I think it's kind of like being on the dance floor, right? Like, you know, the person who's really enjoying the music, you know, and into the music and dancing, and the person who's in dancing just so people can watch them. And I feel like there's something about that. So when talking about transgression, I sometimes roll my eyes at some of the things I read and the things that people are trying to push and put out there, because it has an inauthentic feel
Right.
to me at times. And then there are other people where there's a cum cookbook where this man, this small printing, where just reading this book that like every recipe involved cum, this man was so into it, right? I mean, it's funny, like when I saw it, I was like, what is that? But as I was reading it, I was like, you know that this guy was really getting off on this, right? Like, he loved cum in his recipes, you know, like, so like for him to read this, like he was into it, and for that reason, like, I didn't eat any of the recipes,
But it worked.
in a way, yeah, like, I was there, I was with him, I was supportive of it, you know, so, yeah, so those things, like, even though it seemed so odd, but, like, that I believed in him, yeah.
That's sometimes one of the criticisms of Nin, right? That she somehow the transgressions that she wrote about were not authentic because they're fantasy, right? That was something that's often lobbed at her, and you could say, well, they're fantasies. Is there anything more authentic than that?
Well, fantasies start. You start with your fantasy, and then if you're lucky, then you can just push and you can really cross. You can cross into that transgression. And it's like Stephen says, you know, like there's people that try and push it, oh, I'm going to do erotic drawing, I'm going to do erotic writing. But it's got to come from, pardon the pun, from something really deep inside and push. And you know, I think the jury's still out a little bit on Anais Nin because there's that whole section about the father, you know, and the whole incest thing. Did she have a relationship with him? Maybe, maybe not. But the fact is, at that time, when she was writing about it, she was surrounded, again, by all these surrealists, these men, and a lot of them were like misogynist, and they were kind of trying to push things. And for her, maybe there was some kind of relationship with her father, but she pushed it through. She really pushed those boundaries and kicked it through to a point at where it's House of Incest is the most disturbing book, even today, that I've ever read. So, you know, it depends. Transgression. There's a physical transgression and there's art transgression, and I think if your heart's in it, or your body, or whatever, it will show. And I think House of Incest stands the test of time of like where she pushed those boundaries.
That also makes me think, though, I mentioned Freud before, and
Yeah.
wasn't there the phenomenon of Freud deciding at a significant point in his career that all the stories that he'd been hearing from women who were saying that they had incest experiences or abuse experiences, Freud decided that they were fantasies.
Yes.
As if,
Yeah.
you know, that makes me think of some of the pushback that we've heard around the Me Too reckoning. Well, so many of these stories, this can't be happening this much, can it? Well, yeah, it can. And I wonder if there was a seed in her somewhere that was using that material to fight back against this silencing that was going on pretty much at that cultural moment, and has continued. I mean, it wasn't until the 70s that we got to talk about that stuff again in great numbers, right? So the other thing about transgression that I'm thinking is that I feel like I want to be careful with the word, because it implies pushing through to something else, but plenty of people start at that something else. And they don't, do they understand themselves as transgressing? It's hard to say. It probably depends on how integrated they are into, you know, sexual mores, what kind of community they came from in the first place, is it religious, is it conservative? I remember when I was working at the Lusty Lady, having a guy come in And I saw a lot of masturbation at Molested Lady. I really did, quite a lot of it. It was informative. One guy came in one night and started slamming himself against the glass wall. Slam, 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 slam. And I went, baby, are you masturbating right now? And he went, yeah. Like, this is how you do it, isn't it? And I said, do you ever touch your penis and stroke it? He went, no. So usually when you masturbate, are you at home on a sheet rubbing on it? Yeah. Like, that's how it's done. And I think we forget at our peril that, especially with a sort of an erotic-phobic lid, that even in this sexualized time, we all have to contend with. More so this year than a few years ago, as a matter of fact. And we don't even know which way the pendulum is swinging exactly. That in this context, people find their own sexuality. We might think of it as transgressive as fuck, but from a sexological perspective, that's a judgment sometimes. I mean, I think it's easier to talk about this question when it comes to art and literature. You know, when it comes to valorizing fantasy and taking a trip with it, when it comes to knowing that you're going to make art that hasn't been made the same way before and you're talking about it.
Yeah, and that's exactly, and that's, like say, in this, you know, at this time, you know, this is where the art and literature comes to the fore, you know, forefront, and it will, you know, and it will help, you know, like the transgression in people, or, you know, their gender, whatever it is. It will gently help them rather than, you know, like being pushed in and like having to, because it's hard. It must be really hard, you know, like coming from that point of view, and from that, you know, that body, so to speak. So this is a way of just saying, you know, because everybody's different. This is a way of like looking at art, reading literature and going, I can come out, I can do it in a way that don't have to, that's like maybe not, is, you know, my personality is not to sort of shout it from the roofs. This is like a softer way, a gentle way. And yeah, and I think we're all doing that.
You want to try? No. So in a minute, we will open it up to you. But I feel like we haven't quite done justice to the distinction, and I don't want to belabor this, but eroticism and pornography. Again, I don't want to belabor it, but I think that why eroticism is important now for you has everything to do with how pornography is everywhere. Not everywhere, but it has a totally new status in our culture, more so than it ever has before.
Well, yeah, and that in itself is very exciting, because you know, like pornography, yeah, it has its place and it's good and it's, you know, but as I like analogied it earlier, it's like fast food. It's there, it's good, and you know, in this society, in this climate of self-gratification, and when I say pornography, I don't just mean sexual pornography, I mean visual pornography, I mean everything, you know, all different aspects of culture. So this is like something new again. This is a way of looking at something different with fresh eyes, and from our young people. Because this is what we're looking at, is like our young people, because they're the ones that are always on the phones. They're the ones that like are right in the middle of this, you know, pornographic climate, and it's important to kind of like reach out.
I guess I wonder if there's a way we can talk about those two things, not being, you know, bad pornography, excellent eroticism.
Well, it's
If
not,
there's a way
yeah.
to think of artists who you want to talk about, either writers or artists, who reconcile these categories, or to take the energy of, yeah.
I think since it's hard for all of us on the stage to come up with a definition, then it's really hard to kind of figure out what artists are doing both. When this question just keeps coming up here,
Yeah.
I know of her being the first person that I read it from. I don't know if I can give her credit for it, but Annie Sprinkle said erotica is a feather, pornography is a whole chicken. I think. So yeah. So yeah. So I kind of, I think it is hard to define, but I think in both cases we're talking about sexually charged work. And so for me, they're very kind of, they're hand in hand. I don't necessarily make that distinction. I've jacked off to probably both, right? So, and I think when most of us are looking for stimulation of, a soulful sexual stimulation or just like, that I don't think that I don't think that our genitals make that distinction or even our minds so much. I think that the charge is still there, and I think that's exciting and all valuable.
I think they're both relevant, and as sexual beings, we have to experiment, play around. I think they're really relevant. I just want to bring something a little, this back. I just kind of, I like them both, quite frankly.
And I think one generation's erotica is another's pornography as technology has changed what's possible. The other thing is there's a lot of pornography that's dear to my heart and has made cultural shifts as well as because sex education is so poor in this country, we still do learn a lot about sex, some good and some bad through porn. There's been a lot of important firsts in queer pornography, in pornography created by trans women, created by queer women of color, and that as we're in this pushback of ever-increasing conservatism, that one of the areas that is encroached upon is porn and sex work and what can be shown and stuff that SESTA that was just passed, and it's going to create like a lot of there's been a lot of pushback that's going to make it less safe for our friends in the porn industry right now.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying that some people who think about this stuff, free speech folks, and not the new kind of free speech either. I don't mean that shit. I mean the old school free speech, like sexual speech, political speech, and so forth. That so many people separate out erotica and pornography on what is essentially a high art, low art basis or a class inflected basis. Sometimes if it turns me on, it's erotica, but if it doesn't, it's too extreme or something else. If that must be pornography. Erotica is a subset of pornography in a way. And pornography is definitely a subset of erotica in a way. And it really just depends on it. Certainly they're both erotology, the cultural production of any given society or set of subcultures. through art and culture writing and all of the ways that we leave records of our sexual practices, obsessions, fantasies, and so forth. And all of that is interesting and worthwhile. The fact that people who are not very informed about sexuality and not very respectful of sexual diversity tend to be the people who really want to make that distinction makes me afraid of that distinction on a political and social level. Otherwise I wouldn't really be afraid of that. I think it's, oh, taste. Let's go pick roses, whatever. But in this case, I feel like it is almost always wielded in a way that tries to draw a boundary around what is transgressive and just not let anybody have access to that.
Yeah.
And that leaves people out of the possibility, some people out of the possibility of seeing their own sexuality reflected back to them. And that's just not right.
I think, yeah, I agree, and I think porn and eroticism really should just work hand in hand. It should be separated, and in this, like you say, in this climate where we're getting pushback after pushback, it's time. It's a call to arms, and eroticism, pornography, however you want to express yourself, this is the time.
This is the time to turn to the audience. All right. Question, Dorothy, yeah. Yeah.
We can repeat your question if that's okay, so that the recording gets what you asked.
Okay, absolutely. So let me belabor the point. Just at, and I'm going to be a little huge when I say this, but like, just at a philosophical level, like, pornography is sort of like the word rap is in pornography, and eroticism doesn't have a rap, it doesn't have a visual kind of, it doesn't have a word intrinsic to its meaning that's image or noting something like this, right? So I think my question lies in the labor of this point. While I do agree that they should understand, or mean that it is not necessarily to do with like more polymorphic in that sense. Is it that pornography is just about the kind of more physical kind of gaze, and there are a lot of people who have a little bit more like imagination, and that literature is included in that because text is very text, and like just words are so different, even when spoken versus kind of trying to do something to a moving image or a static image. I'm not, so like I'm curious how you feel about that, where eroticism has a little bit more, it could be a little bit more, like, knowledgeable than something like pornography, which because eroticism is almost like an umbrella where pornography is not necessarily an umbrella for many people. And I'm playing devil's advocate by asking you all that. I'm not saying it's
I
true.
think okay, so what kind of like made me a bit confused was like with the beginning of your question when you were saying like with porn being just a gay thing, it's across the board. Did I miss?
I'm talking about the word actually having, like, when you think about pornography, like graph or the graphic part.
Sorry.
It has nothing to do with sexuality. I'm asking about the actual etymology of the word, where it already connotes a visual image. It connotes something.
Well, the isms, eroticism, it's like impressionism, it's like surrealism, it's eroticism initially, it was connected, it was this arts and culture, this arts that's, but yes.
They also had a culture of education, right? So you look at Plato's Symposium, for example, right? So people, when were talking about eros, they were educating. It was an underground practice. It was an elitist practice. So you had a master teaching initiates, right? And so for a long time, the teaching of eros, the culture, the practices, on one hand, you relied on the representations. right? So the writing, the art, but it was all very underground, right? And it was an elitist practice, particularly even up to the Victorian age. And when you got capitalism, when you got mass reproduction, you no longer could constrain the erotic postcards. And then every time you have a new medium, film, for example, or even the internet, you get this proliferation of visual imagery, of eroticism. So my project that I'm working right now is Feminist Ars Erotica. I do not make a distinction anymore between eroticism or queer porn, feminist porn. It's all about empowerment of, and consensual and sex positivity, right? However, you can also include in that what you would call the sex negative feminists, like Emma Sukovitz, doing a mattress thing or her porn projects, in the sense that it's educating, and in a sense it's making visual what had been not been seen before, and giving a platform for discussion, right? So the Me Too movement, even though you can see it as being very negative or something like that, at least it is creating a public platform so people can understand what is sexual harassment, what is bad sex, that cat person essay, where people did not even have this understanding before. And going back to Anais Nin, the Kraft e-big and a taxonomy of atrocious men, Manuel, Pierre, the genital slasher. I mean, I write that in the catalog essay, right? Today we have Harvey, we have Larry, we have Bill, right? So Anais Nin kind of was a precursor to understanding not only female eroticism, but male sexual pathology as well. So we owe her a lot because we've learned a lot. And there you go. Again, the educative function. As also, going back to transgression, there are many theories of transgression, right? So Bataille, Foucault, et cetera, it's liberation. And that's what, Dorian, you were saying. When you took that class, is the idea of freedom, which is also very important for eroticism. Sorry, I'm lecturing.
First of all, I'm a really shy public speaker and I shake, so pardon me if my voice shakes. I was a erotic photographer in the 80s and the 90s, and I specifically would, through ACT UP and Queer Nation, would use my work as a way of activism, and we would purposely send my work through to different countries to see which countries would let it through. And it was during Jesse Helm's days when he was blanking on the word, when he was censoring art. I remember specifically Japan had like a list of, I think 15 different sex acts that would make it pornographic and not let it go through the country. I remember there was fisting or other things. I always thought it was that then, it was an excuse for them to have fun and look at stuff, is probably what it really was. But it was a photographing safe sex and then photographing erotic sex and purposely using it as a tool to cause people who wouldn't usually look at it to look at it and to decide what they were going to do with it. So I was remembering something that you were saying about art as activism that I used to send it through customs a lot with a lot of different countries. So.
And was that part of the documentation when you presented the work?
A lot of times we would just, I would have shows in small towns or just to see where I would get censored. And I actually was very popular in little places like Akron, Ohio, and then almost got censored by the DA here in San Francisco for the same show. But then it's been so long and I didn't expect to talk right now, so I'm not remembering specifically where we sent it. But we used to specifically send the prints through different to Germany, to Australia, to Japan, and not for any specific reason other than to see what customs would say about it going through. So that was the activism with the art of the erotica. And go ahead.
Yeah, would you please share your name and let us know like where we can look up this work?
Jessica Tanzer, and Susie Bright gave me my first job at On Our Backs, and I've been published a lot, and I used to show a lot when I was younger. Now I'm a bread and butter photographer now, so now I shoot for architects. But I probably had 30 shows by the time I was about 24, and I had an apartment on Castro Street. We had the big rallies for ACT UP and Bangkok. They were doing that off my window ledge. So, in those San Francisco days. But so that was art that was art for erotica for activism and trying to separate it from being pornographic. So just a thought since you know. No, but
I want to say too about that era that there was this real efflorescence of women wanting to make sure that we represented ourselves, because there was a fair amount of women being represented sexually in work that had been made by men, or even, you could sort of say, for men in the case of Anais' Writing for Money, although I would also argue that she kept a lot of her own sensibility in what she did. And that it's hard to describe what an important political project that seemed like it was. I mean, it still is, right? But at the point at which it set off, extremely world changing for those of us who lived through that.
Passing the mic around.
Oh. Was there somebody else who wanted to grab the mic? Hey!
Hello, so thank you for all speaking, that was really wonderful. I had a question about, it's been mentioned a few times, about technology's role in changing eroticism, and like specifically with like virtual reality porn, how that's kind of changing, if you've seen it, it's mostly from the view of the male. How does that change the way eroticism is, consumed or, practiced in our society? So, I mean, there's VR porn, and there's also the internet that kind of creates distance, or kind of closes the distance between the viewer and the object that's, or the person that's on the screen. So, anyone's opinions on that?
I think we're right in the middle of a revolution of perception. It's hard to answer this question because that's what I'm feeling that I want to say about it. The other, we've alluded to it, I think, on the panel, but I don't think we said it specifically, like that photography itself is a relatively recent medium. Over 100 years old now, but less than 200, right? So when, the reason those postcards could be made available is printing and photography and access to models and people wanting to take pictures and all that. And I think that we're now sort of on this edge of is eroticism mediated by computers at its sort of highest technological possibility going to be a really elite, non-accessible kind of technology, or is it actually gonna trickle out and affect almost everyone? I mean, I think we can argue that internet pornography has affected everyone's sexuality who has bothered to check it out or who has gotten in a relationship with someone who has, just because we are learning particular ways to look at bodies and sexuality. That's that's the anti-porn argument in a nutshell in a way, and it's also sort of the pro-porn argument in a nutshell. It's not, I think you could value it in either direction depending on how you're talking about it. I don't like the idea that porn is being used for sex ed at all, except when I am, right? I have to make a lot of really, but then again, on the other hand, statements when I talk about that stuff. So I remember a number of years ago, Good Vibrations celebrated the turn of the millennium by having a sex toys you wish existed contest, millennium version. Because the first time we did this, you had to invent something that somebody could make and use like then, with the materials that were available, the technologies that were available. But for the millennium version, you didn't have to be constrained by that. And the winner was a middle school principal from upstate New York. I'm going to tell you his name. So imagine that by about 2050, and I really hope that he is right, by about 2050, we'll be able to, I think the science fiction writers would call it jacking in. We'd be able to experience bodily, recorded sexual experience from ourselves in the past or from other people. That will change the world. If we can get it out of it. I hope so. I'm dying to get that. The brain technologies that are going on right now could lend themselves to that.
This is a bit left of field, but like sometimes, and it's been documented that this whole thing about you can actually have an orgasm just by the imagination. You don't need a physical, and you can actually, and you don't even have to touch yourself. But the thing, if you're so aroused and that, it's delving into that imagination, and I think it is very, very possible that sort of regression, like memories and whatever you can bring out, and you can do it. So I think it'll be great. I mean, I hope I'm around, but I think it's fantastic. I look forward to it. Okay, well, it looks like we're coming to the end. I just want to thank everybody for coming, and I really, really appreciate it. And I want to thank Carol for letting us have this discussion in a wonderful Centre for Sex and Culture. Thank you. I want to thank Dorian for being a superstar and helping me every step of the way put the show off. And I want to thank Stephen, who is superstar, who has come up all the way from LA. How about that? All the way from LA to be here, and big superstar, big thank you for that. And to the wonderful Laura for being such a brilliant moderator and again, superstar. As we sort of mentioned, or as Laura mentioned at the beginning, we're a non-profit, and all these events that we do, this discussion, there's no payment, there's no door tap, anything like that. So we would appreciate as you go out, there's a donation box. So please help us to keep the centre alive. Thank you.
And I want to thank Colette for making this evocative, beautiful work for us to riff off of. There's something, my historian's heart is so touched and happy that you are continuing an affair with this important woman who has been dead for 40 years. And yet here you have brought her to life, and your love for her is so obvious, and that's a time-space continuum riff that I think we would all learn from.